My name is Crystal Sharon, and I will be discussing the program called The Cost of Baseball. So the problem was that in the spring of 2023, I became the team admin for a travel baseball team. And trying to determine the cost of the season became a burden and a challenge. With so many costs to consider, costs constantly adjusting, and also the thought of not asking for more money during the season, it became overwhelming. So my goal was to create a calculator that intakes expenses and associated costs for a season of baseball, then to break down the individual fees for each athlete. In order to create this, I had to seek the input of our community members. So I put together a baseball program coding input Google form, and I sent it out on different social media platforms, and I was able to get 175 responses from team admins, from coaches, and parents involved with the programs. I had 3 questions. What considerations are chosen for a new season? With insurance and the cost of the uniform being the most considerate, several other people, 79 options for tournament fees, umpire fees, and this made me realize that regionally, this could differ based on what is available in the area. For example, in Georgia, in Gwinnett, we don't pay umpire fees for tournaments. That's actually included in our tournament fees. The second question that was submitted is looking at which is the most important payment method for families. Do they want to know the overall cost of the season, or do they want to know just the monthly payment breakdown? And in fact, they wanted to know both the overall cost and the breakdown of the monthly payments per athlete. Finally, the third question I was looking into was fundraising and whether or not those funds should go to the athlete or if it should go towards the team because it is part of those funds that are raised. And what I got was that parents wanted the flexibility to choose where they go, whether it does go to their actual player's account or if it goes towards the organization. So with my goal set to create this calculator, I had to break it down and use decomposition to figure out the strategy for making my algorithm. So this is what we came up with. First, there were 3 lists. The first one was an expenditure, providing just the options, here are some examples of expenditures you could have. There are expenditures that are user input that the coach or the team admin would put in, and then a third list of what the expenditures cost. Next is the function to add items and costs to the list. So this function was pulled in from the survey in which admins were requesting, I guess, just that flexibility to put in specifically, these are what our team needs, rather than me providing a list of what is available. You can input whatever you'd want into that list as your expenditure. The loops to continue adding items in. This was part of my pattern recognition, just determining that if I did not put in these loops, I would be repeating a lot of code. It would be redundant and cumbersome. Calculations to determine the cost. This was again brought out by the survey where they were asking, we would like both the overall cost for each athlete and the monthly breakdown for each athlete. Finally, printing feedback. This was sort of my idea to make it more visually accessible to anyone that was using the program so that it gave you instant feedback on what you imported as your list, but also some visual differentiation so that you can see what's actually on the screen. So with all that, I also used abstraction to build my algorithm for that algorithm development by actually creating a second replet. So I had my original algorithm, which I will pull up right now. I had my original algorithm, but I also had a second replet that was just sort of a practice. So for example, when I had an input or when I was working on my function, I just had that part in the other Replit so I could test it out and make sure that it did exactly what I wanted it to do. And so that was part of my testing and debugging, was practicing it on a smaller scale rather than trying to alter everything that would be affected in this main program. So let's take a look through here. I've got a couple of things up front, pre the actual printing of the code. So I have a color library, which I'll show you the purpose of that in just a minute. The list of possible expenditures. This color library. I actually learned a lot about the ANSI color code, which is pretty cool. That each color has its own sort of code, just like each letter has the binary code. And so by importing this Colorama library, each color has already had a variable tied to that color. So when I put 4.blue, it prints my font in blue. So this is the list of possible expenditures. This right here, these are just the examples of expenditures that coaches could use. Then I have this right here, include cost is my list. For every time the coach or the team admin input something, it's added to that list. Here's a list of costs. So every item that's added to their list, they can also attach a cost to it, which we'll talk about in just a second. So here I've got intro. This is what you see right here. This calculator is intended to provide a baseball team and administrator with a cost breakdown for a travel season. So notice that I put this \n. What I figured was basically a shortcut that one of my students taught me, that rather than putting this like on line 22, the print parentheses, it does the same function, but it adds that space behind it. And I put that space just to give, again, visual clarity. So it says, please follow the prompts below for your most accurate cost breakdown. So here we're going to determine the months of the season, and this will be used in our calculations later on. So baseball season typically lasts anywhere from 3 to maybe 8, 9 months. So we'll kind of go, 5 is pretty typical. I hit enter, and now it's asking me here to determine the number of players. A baseball team typically has between 9 to 12 players. 11 is a pretty solid number, so we're going to use that. Again, here's a list of possible expenditures on the season. So that is our initial list. These are examples of what the coaches could put, but it is not limited to what they need. And then it goes into our function. So here it goes into enter an expenditure. If no more expenditures, enter end with a string method of capitalized. So I'm going to just type in a couple of expenditures. Let's go with tournaments. Let's add coaching. Let's add insurance. And we'll add uniforms. So this will kind of incorporate a little bit more of the code here. So while the loop to repeat what else is needed for expenditures. So every time you add another object here that you type it in, I've got the append that will add it to that list of items. Then here for loop, for loop within a while loop and a function. So this, I just learned this in CodeHS. I was so excited because I was trying to figure out how do I give a little bit more meaning to my list. I wanted to repeat the list so that whoever the user was could see exactly what they're inputting. And so enumerate basically allows me to type out each item, and it provides a value, a numeric value to it. So here I have got string I plus 1. I had to put the 1, otherwise, as we know with the index, it starts with a 0, so this would provide the number starting at 1 all the way down. And it will repeat every time you add another expenditure. So at this point, we have our list of items, and we're going to type in end. And it's going to ask, is your list of expenditures complete, yes or no? So this will help us to close out our loop. So I will type in yes, and it's going to bring us to our next loop. So here, for loop to determine the prices of expenditures. This was probably the most challenging part of this project for me because I had to figure out how do I assign a value to each part of the list, and I really couldn't. It's not possible to assign that value, maybe perhaps using a dictionary, but with a list you can't. So what I ended up doing, I had to learn how to use a sort of an F string literal. So here you've got the F, and basically what it says is when you have item, for every item that's in that list, it's going to populate the item. And then when the person inputs the cost, and I put a float in case they have, $50.50, it's going to append that to the price list. And so here we have our total price of tournament. So let's say we've got $7,800 for the whole season. Our coaching staff is going to be $800. Our insurance, let's say it's $750. And our uniforms are a pretty big chunk, so that's $3,200. So now this is the calculation part. We're almost near the end, where we have the total cost of the season. So this basically adds up our prices here. So you have the player total is player total divided by players, and that is rounded. This is another function I had to learn to round. So it pulls in the player total list or calculation, and it rounds it to the second decimal. And then we also have the total price for each player rounded, just like was requested in the survey. So for each person in this case, they would be paying just shy of $1,200 for the whole season, and they would be paying about $230 per month. So again, now you can see that blue just makes it visually easier to see what is happening. And this just makes it very practical for anybody using this calculator. So just some reflections. I was successful in creating the calculator. It took me a while to learn some of the smaller details, the fine print. I was excited about the opportunity for this, but it also has potential to expand. You can incorporate specifically with, for example, the uniforms. There's different aspects of the uniform. This calculator would basically take a total. After you've gathered the cost of all of your uniforms, here's where you would put it. So based on the research survey, the only part I was unable to truly address was the fundraising. The modifications can be made for specific items for fundraising. That would be more of a challenge because you don't know exactly how much you would anticipate from receiving in those fundraisers. Now, for my students, what I really like about this project too is that I can use this as an example. So for example, this past week, we learned about string methods in class, and I was able to show components of my program to show this is why I use a string method, or this is why I would put dot lower. And so that was visually, they could see when and where you could possibly use that. Also, with my algorithm, with the use of the colors, I think that is beneficial for the students to see why, have that discussion. Why would you make it color coded? Is there benefit to just having it all white? And have that discussion of accessibility too. It's something that I was intrigued with learning, and I hope that they enjoy that as well. Finally, I think going through the design thinking process was really eye-opening for me in finding the empathy, getting the survey results. I was very excited to get the level of responses I had, but also portraying that with my students, the importance of you are serving a clientele, and you need to understand how you're going to best serve them with whatever solution that you come up with. It's not always just your ideas, but it could also be something that, you maybe now have thought about this because you have not talked to them. And then just going back through testing, debugging, and just looking through your code, that was something that I had to kind of experience with this program. And I think it was a great experience for me to kind of show them how I went through that as well.